Good evening, Simon here, Explosive Action. I'm here with a different kind of video today. This is a response video to brainsmasher, who put up a video earlier today. Well, I'm not too sure when I'll be putting this one out, but anyway, put up a video recently about the most important albums in his collection that helped form his musical tastes today. And that itself was a response video to another YouTuber called Marty Worm. But I watched brainsmasher's video and I felt quite inspired to give this a go myself. So I've picked out all of the albums and a few here that I don't actually have anymore, so I'm going to have to just put something on the screen. The albums that formed my taste as a teenager. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is one that I no longer have because it's actually not a CD and somehow I lost the tape. So I'll put a little digital thing on the screen somewhere. This was a 3-track compilation tape called Hardcore, a 3-track sampler. I won it in 1992 when I was 12. And I won it at a year 6, so that's primary school in Australia. That's the, what do you call that in America? Junior high, maybe? Are we at that point? I'm not too sure. It's before you get to high school. Last year before you get to high school. Anyway, there was a school disco and playing all the usual crap. And for whatever reason, I won the award for Best Dancer. I don't remember how. I don't remember what I was doing. But anyway, the DJ very excitedly gave me this tape. So it's a disco for for 10, 11, 12-year-olds playing whatever the hits were at the time, and he hands me this tape. The tape had things on it I'd never heard of, didn't know what the hell it was. The first track was Bowels of the Devil by Body Count. And then I think it was Pantera. I can't remember which Pantera song it was. It was from Vulgar Display of Power by Demons Be Driven or something. And then there was a Ministry song. And yeah, I took that home and played it on my tape deck, which is all I had at that time. And I played it quietly because I thought this was just pure evil. I didn't know what I was listening to. It took me a while to really understand what was going on, and I still didn't really because I was not yet in high school and I didn't know anybody else that listened to this music. So it was a pretty strange experience, listening to this 3-track sampler over and over and over and over and over again. Same 3 tracks on both sides. I just let it play and play and play, trying to digest Body Count, Pantera, and Ministry. And that was pretty groundbreaking for me at the time. And I think when I got to high school, I forgot I even had the tape. And I got about with just trying to cope with high school, and I didn't really focus too much on music. That is until I came across this one, Metallica and Justice for All. This is my original CD. All of these CDs are the originals. I've never sold them or anything like that. These are the ones that I got at the time. So, yep, and Justice for All. Somebody it would have been year 7, maybe year 8, first 1 or 2 years of high school. I was talking to him. He had long hair, and he was telling me about this band Metallica, and I really wasn't listening to much at this point. I think I found on my own accord a tape of Def Leppard's Adrenalize, which was pretty terrible, but at the time it was sort of loud rock music, and I think it was comparable in my brain to that 3-track sampler. But anyway, he said, "Have you heard this song called One?" I said, "Nope." And he lent me the CD. And I only played the song One from memory. I skipped to it and just played that. I don't think I even tried the other tracks. I don't know why. I was 13. But anyway, I returned the CD to him. I remember liking it or not really hating it or whatever, but I gave it back to him and then I guess thought nothing much of it. A few months later, in the town, a used CD shop opened up. It was called Mad Hatters, and it was run by a guy called Clem. And I went in there with my dad. He drove me down, and I was given a CD player at Christmas and had one CD, which was like top 100% hits of 1993 or something like that, just garbage. And he took me down there, and I took my pocket money and I bought this guy and played it to death for a solid year. It was the only thing I had. I memorized everything. I could air drum everything. I still can. I memorized the lengths of the songs. If anybody asked me, I could tell you the Dies Eve was 5 minutes 12 long, and I was obsessed by it. I was obsessed by the photos. I hadn't really seen or heard much about Metallica, so this was just like four guys that I had never seen anything like that. Never seen people that looked like this in my daily life, so it was a pretty immense album and a massive, massive change in anything I was really used to besides that 3-track sampler. So that was And Justice for All, and played it forever. Now we're in high school. Different guy. He started telling me about this band called, he kept saying Sepultura. Sepultura, have you heard Sepultura? No, I hadn't. And he, I think, lent me a tape of Chaos AD, and I was floored, and I picked up a copy, probably from Clem. Don't remember exactly where I got it from. And again, I was obsessed by this for the entirety of like 1994, and I got a couple of, one mainly. I got one guy just into it as much as me. We were heaps obsessed. We were drawing the Sepultura S logo on school chalkboards. He started to learn guitar, and he sprayed it on his guitar case. And I bought the VHS. I think it was the Third World Posse VHS. I think that was the one, which was sort of the life of Chaos ID on tour. And it was just, it was groundbreaking. Amazing stuff. I don't go to this album very much anymore. Every now and then I still do. It's certainly very different to earlier Sepultura, which is what I mainly play these days, but it's still awesome. And it just occurred to me that I've skipped over two important albums because I don't have them anymore. So before Chaos AD, there was another guy at school, and he got me into Pantera, and I played Vulgar Display of Power, which I found that track from the tape, that compilation, and Far Beyond Driven, and that was a band that stayed with me for quite some time. A good 10 years at least. I was really into the band. Not so much anymore. I don't have any of their albums anymore. Definitely a band I would say I've outgrown is Pantera. But they were there at the time. And that was some just straight, loud, heavy, but different to Metallica, Justice for All. It was not intricate and technical like that. It was just blunt force trauma stuff, particularly those two albums, just shredding and loud, big punishing drums. And then a few of us ended up at high school getting into the band, and then when Great Southern Trendkill came out, we all got into it, and then we that group of friends, would have been about 8 of us, went and saw the band on, when was it, 1996, Great Southern Trendkill tour, my very first concert, all of our very first concerts. And since that day at the Sydney Entertainment Centre, which no longer exists, I have had tinnitus in my right ear, and it's purely from that fucking concert. But anyway, that happened before Sepultura. Then Fear Factory Demanufacture. This is when I started to listen to the radio. Now, the radio sucks, but I learnt, I think probably through schoolmates, that there was a radio station called Triple J. Triple J is the youth-oriented but government-run broadcaster nationwide. And they played indie stuff, and it was all, Offspring and that kind of shit, and whatever was popular at the time. Nirvana, that kind of stuff. And for 3 hours every, I think, Tuesday night, from might have been like 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., something like that, was a show called The 3 Hours of Power. And it had an immense intro that got me excited every time it played. And you would learn new shit and hear some favourites for 3 hours. And I would struggle to stay awake until 1 a.m. to listen to it. I don't think I ever made it to the end, but definitely made it to midnight on multiple occasions. And one band they were talking about was Fear Factory, and they kept playing Demanufacture, the opening track, for months and months. And it grabbed me, and I hadn't heard anything like that to this point. It sounded very different to all the other bands that I've been talking about. And I made a mission to get that, and I was again obsessed with this band and this album. I bought the shirt, and I actually ended up seeing them by chance. So would have been 97, and we had at the time a nationwide concert in the key cities called the Big Day Out. It was on Australia Day in Sydney, January 26th, I think, and it had mainly indie bands and loud popular bands. I remember Soundgarden and Chili Peppers and that kind of stuff were there. And the one I wanted to go to, Sepultura, were going to be there. And I bought my tickets, and a month before, we all got told, this is pre-internet, at least no, I didn't have the internet, that Sepultura had to pull out because Max broke his knee. But it's okay, the band that replaced them was Fear Factory. I'm like, cool, fine with me. I liked both bands. I got to the front and I waited in the 42-degree January heat. This was back when concerts didn't give a shit, and there was no water bottles, there was nothing. You just stood there in the heat. 10,000 people waiting for Fear Factory to hit the stage. I'm this 16-year-old kid. And they opened up with the kick drums from Demanufacture, and I got caught in that mosh. It was insane. I lasted one song. I got just crumpled, and I had to beg my way back because I couldn't breathe. I couldn't stand. It was absolutely nuts. And then I watched the entire set from sort of the midway mark and really, really, really enjoyed it. There are still there's videos on YouTube. If you look for Fear Factory Channel V, as in letter V, that was a cable TV channel that got some footage from Big Day Out, and you will see, I think it's a clip of Self-Bias Resistor from that show, and it's absolutely crushing. Band were in their prime. And yeah, so Fear Factory, Demanufacture, very important album to me. Then I just started to explore. Morbid Angel, Domination. Again, this was on Triple J, on 3 Hours of Power, but it was also on their compilation CD, which they put out, which was mainly, all these indie bands, and then in the middle of it, they played Eyes to See, Ears to Hear, and that was the heaviest thing I'd ever heard. It was just this swarm of guitar and the kick drums that never stopped being double kicks. It was just ridiculous. And I remember getting, there was an Australian magazine at the time called HM, Heavy Metal, and they reviewed Domination, and they didn't like it. They said that the double kicks never stopped. It was an album of double kicks, and that was bad somehow. And I just read that and went, well, that sounds amazing. Then I saw the cover art, and, I'm 16, and it's this evil-looking satanic thing. I'm like, yeah, I'm sold. And I played this for ages, and this became one of those albums I played on my Discman. When I finally got a Discman, probably about 97, I would play it on the school bus, and I played it in the car trips and stuff like that. I remember trying to draw this pentagram and sort of make versions of this cover. Heavily obsessed by this album for a long time, and I went back and got the other albums prior to it, because that's all there was at the time, the first four, and enjoyed them all equally. But this was absolutely gateway stuff, as was Eaten Back to Life, Cannibal Corpse. This one I got from Clem down at Mad Hatter, purely based on the cover art. I hadn't heard about them. I just went, that is insane. That is insane. This is a horror movie on a CD. And it was the most stripped back thing I'd heard at the time yet. It's quite raw. Obviously, it had been out since like 92 or something, 91. So on this edition, actually, this might have been an Australian only edition, but it was Butchered at Birth and Eaten Back to Life on one CD. So you get sort of two front covers and then all on the one CD. I did have Eaten Back to Life separately. That's what I got from Clem, but then I got this at some point to replace that and to get Butchered at Birth. Butchered at Birth still isn't one that I ever gravitate to. It's all very samey. It's the album I skip. But Eaten Back to Life, that was one I played a lot of long car trips. Eaten Back to Life was featured. Hypocrisy, Abducted. So I remember on one holiday, would have been 97, I think. A lot of things happened in 96, 97. Massive years. Holiday with the family, and we went to Queensland, and I don't remember exactly why or what we did there, but I remember we got to like the last day and I hadn't spent any Christmas money. And so we went to a record store, and I didn't buy any CDs. I bought a VHS. I bought two VHS. They were Death Is Just the Beginning, Volume 3 and 4. The Nuclear Blast compilation tapes. I could do a video about the bands on those tapes just itself. I mean, those tapes had Hypocrisy, Gorefest, Amorphous, Benediction, Sinister, all of these things, Dismember, all of those bands were hugely important to me. But this was the one that clicked the most, Abducted. It had the clip for Roswell 47, which has just a sort of a mid-paced groove. The vocals were nuts. That was the most banshee-sounding vocals I'd heard yet. And the whole thing was about aliens, and that really helped because I was this nuts kid into sci-fi alien movies. So that really sealed the deal. I still listen to this one quite a lot. Big fat sound that works for this album. The drums were always something that I thought were a little bit off. They didn't sound brilliant, but the guitar tone I thought was great. Abducted, fantastic. Now, this has got to be like my number one album of all time, but I can't recall how that happened. There's a blank. Somewhere around that period, I found this album. I think it might have been online through conversations on IRC. I don't recall. I don't think it came from school. Pretty sure it didn't come from school. It didn't come from Clem. I got this from Utopia Records, big famous Sydney record store. I remember buying it there. I don't remember why I bought it, but goddamn, I'm glad I did. This was just nothing had sounded like this. It didn't sound like Cannibal Corpse. It didn't sound like Morbid Angel. It sounded like these pictures of just rotting corpses, but in a medical scenario. It was clinical. I loved the intros. That really gave it a feeling of being in a hospital. Surgeons doing things that they shouldn't be doing. Scientists going over the top. And these ridiculous song titles. Just like Incarnated Solvent Abuse, which is still probably my favourite song of all time, with that mental video clip. Yeah, I can't tell you exactly how this album happened, but it got me on a journey of Carcass. That when I got this, I think Swan Song had already come out and the band had disbanded, so I was just on a mission to try and find everything about this band, and the internet was something I had now, and there's a Carcass fan page that still exists in a form now. It's still around, that I just obsessed over. It had interviews, it had this guy's collection of bootlegs, it had everything, t-shirts and stuff. I ended up getting, in a 5-year period, all of their albums on CD, a good 20 shirts imported from the UK, LP bootlegs. I was just completely obsessed with Carcass, and I still am. They're still my favourite band. Nothing's changed. And this album is still one I go to very frequently. Necroticism. Suffocation, Pierced from Within. Pretty sure this was one I heard on 3 Hours of Power, Depths of Depravity, with that really cool drumming intro. I'm pretty sure that's how this one happened. It was every time I get to another album, it's like this is the heaviest thing yet, because this was one of those times. It's a time that can't really happen again, when you can listen to a band and then it's heavier than the last band, and they just kept going and going for ages. So yeah, Pierced from Within. It's a thick sounding album, absolutely killer drums. The vocals were just monstrous. I go to Effigy way more these days, but this one was just a steamroller. Absolutely smashed you in the face, and I can't believe I can thank radio for that. At the Gates, Slaughter of the Soul. Don't listen to this one a great deal anymore. I usually listen to like Red in the Sky's Owls these days. But the melodic licks on this, the best thing I could compare it to when I found it was Hypocrisy Abducted. And I didn't know why at the time. And obviously it turns out they're both Swedish and sort of have a similar kind of style. But this was like a chainsaw. The guitars were just ridiculous. The pace of the album, it never slowed down. It was just a ferocious and real tight sounding album, and I started seeing posters around. Pretty sure I grabbed this from Utopia because they told me to. And I remember hearing the actual Slaughter of the Soul. I think just one segment before the chorus, there was like a sample online. Don't remember where, but it was some just 20-second sample, just looping one bar up to the chorus, and I obsessed over that for ages, just playing that sample. And then I found this album, and rest is history. But yeah, if you didn't have Slaughter of the Soul, you wouldn't have metalcore bands at all. So in a way, you kind of wish this album didn't exist, but take what you can get. And then we started to venture into black metal. Emperor, Anthems to the Welkin at Dusk. I am pretty sure I started to see posters of this artwork in record stores. This was pretty big when it was dropping in, was it 97? I think it was 97. It was a pretty big deal when this was coming out. And it was getting lots of promotion. And I think 3 Hours of Power played Ye and Trans Imperium rather than Loss and Curse. From memory, that's what my memory tells me. And again, this was, at that time, the heaviest thing I'd ever heard. It was relentlessly fast. The drumming was nothing... I had never heard anything like that. It never stopped. Brutal drumming. Banshee vocals, twin guitar attack, and then the symphonic keyboards, which was pretty new for me as well. Also at the same time, and I don't have this anymore, Dimmu Borgir's Enthroned Darkness Triumphant. Quite a cheesy album, but I got it around the same time as this, and although I could realise it was more pompous and not as evil as this, both got airplay with me at that time, which would have been 98, 97, 98. They were my late high school albums, and because of both of them, I went to my year 12 muck-up day. So I don't know if America or UK or anybody has this, but the end of your final high school year, so everyone's 17 or so, a couple of lucky people might be 18, everyone's about 17, and you finish all your classes and you've not quite up to the final week of exams. They call it the HSC, the final exams of high school, and then you're finished with school. And there's a period in between where you're supposed to be studying, and before that kicks off, there is a thing called Muck-Up Day. Not sure if they still do it, but they did it back then. And the Year 12s get one day to come in whatever clothes they want and just dick around and be pricks to the Year 7ers. Yeah, and pranks, and it always got out of hand. But anyway, You put on a mock assembly, and somebody would dress up as the principal, and is usually as Hitler, and anyway, it was terrible. Anyway, everyone's coming dressed as punk kids and whatever weird stuff they came as, and I came dressed in fucking corpse paint and an Emperor t-shirt, and I got the strangest looks from everybody, my peers, my teachers. That was what cemented me as being different from everybody else in the school. I was very much getting into black metal, and Anthems to Welcome at Dusk was largely responsible for that. Maybe I can dig up a photo of me in corpse paint and include it somewhere around here. So, at this point, we're online. High school is finishing, and these albums, to push this away, these 4 albums all happened through meeting a guy online on IRC, Internet Relay Chat, for those that don't remember, which was just typing messages backwards and forwards, but in a group chat. Basically, it's like a group chat on a topic. I was in one group topic called black metal, and all I knew at this point was Emperor and Dimmu Borgir, and I think like Covenant or something. Anyway, I started talking to one of the guys, and he said he would dub me a tape of true black metal, and included on that tape were these 4 bands: Kampfar, Windir, Darkthrone, and Mayhem, all songs from these albums. 2 songs from each band, I think, on this tape. And this was very different for me, particularly that. I didn't know what to make of Transylvanian Hunger. I will admit, on that tape, it started with Kampfar, which I could digest a bit more, and then it went into Windir, which I could digest quite a lot. Then we went into Mayhem, and I didn't know what the hell was going on those vocals, and then Darkthrone, and it was just like white noise. Of course now it's different, but I really had to grow into these 2, particularly that one. But that tape I played over and over until I did work out these bands. I remember first listening to the Transylvanian Hunger tape, songs on that tape, which I think was the title track. I don't remember the other track. It was definitely the title track, though. And I just thought the tape was broken because it had absolutely no bass in it. It just sounded like bees in a matchbox. And that was how it was meant to be, of course. And it took me a while to work that one out. But Kampfar, that was a big pagan-sounding thing. Never heard anything like that. Windir, same pagan stuff, but they add Vikings to it. Big, epic sound. Particularly, I think it's the second track on this one, Arntor, a Warrior, which has this bit in the middle where it just stops and has an amazing riff, and then it kicks in with these rolling drums. And that was just like, sailing away in a longboat, Viking longboat stuff. I was taken away with that. The Mistress Dom Satanas, I really enjoyed the riffs, but it took me ages to work out the vocals. Yes, this is the old DSP press, and my CD is actually fucking broken. I wasn't going to bother showing this kind of stuff, but the original CD I've got, and you will notice those horrible black marks. It is being eaten alive. It's been slowly happening over 20 years. Doesn't play anymore. Nothing you can do about that kind of rot. Anyway, annoying. And Transylvanian Hunger, absolutely raw and savage. So that tape set the benchmark for Abigor. Verwüstung, Invoke the Dark Age. If Necroticism is my number 1 album of all time, and then Verwüstung is number 2. This is it's like a mix of all 4 of those bands in one. It's raw, like the Darkthrone and Mayhem, but it has a bit more grandeur and a bit more epicness, like the Windir and the Kampfar. I never thought of that before, but it kind of does. And this one I found, I think through that black metal chat. I got sent one track. I think it might have been Was it like Eye to Eye at Armageddon or something like that? I think that might have been it. Yeah, would have been that. And I went and found this one from Red Eye Records, and I still remember this. I was buying used CDs as much as I could back then because they were cheaper and I had no income. Um, and in the used section, they had this one, and then next to it, the same one but with a black and white cover. I thought that must be a misprint. I'll get the color one. Oh man, I really wish I brought that black and white one. It's worth a small fortune. But anyway, I'm stoked by this album. I've played it more times than I can imagine. It was really eye-opening for how things could sound without having to sound right. Like in Sin, half that's out of tune. Doesn't matter though. Like there's some real dud notes in that song, but it doesn't matter. It is phenomenal. It's like the whole thing works despite of flaws and makes it perfect. So there's a second story with this album. When I started going to gigs when I was about 19, going 20, there was a gig that I heard about through guys that I'd only started to talk to online called Metal for the Brain. This was a concert that had been held in Canberra, the nation's capital, for a number of years before, and they were all going to carpool down to go see it, and that was something I'd never done before, going on a journey like that. But I was the right age, and my parents said, "Yep, just be safe." I'm like, "Okay." So we all carpooled, and the guy who had his P plates, provisional license, and drove his shitty metalmobile down to Canberra at speeds we probably shouldn't have been going at, blasting stuff in his trashy tape deck, and just sort of, like that scene in Wayne's World, headbanging in the car. That was us for a 3.5 hour trip. And it was amazing. That was some serious bonding time. But I remember we played Verwesting all the way through at least 3 times because we all loved it. And the Kingdom of Darkness intro, that thing, man, we were just, that was some invisible oranges in the car for that. That was some fantastic, real fun metal moments in that car trip. So yeah, Verwesting, hugely important album. Immortal, Pure Holocaust. So we're still at school. I'm jumping around a bit, but we're in the last year of school, and I remember, actually, I have to show two albums at the same time because it makes more sense. Immortal, Pure Holocaust, and Sepultura, Schizophrenia. So at this point, I started to regress a bit in terms of technicality and sound, and just find this really raw, nasty shit. And Pure Holocaust was definitely one that ticked that. It was like, okay, that's what you can do with black metal, is it? Okay. Because I hadn't picked up that Darkthrone yet. It was just on that tape and I was still digesting it. So really, this was the first rawer sounding, or more raw sounding black metal than Emperor's Anthems that I paid money for. And that was Pure Holocaust. I got this from Clem for sure, at Mad Hatter secondhand. And it took me a while to really understand this one too. I didn't get past Unsilent Storms in the North Abyss for quite some time, just sort of playing that track, because that's got a cool intro. And like it starts, like dun 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 dun, and you go, oh, there's a groove there, and then it just like falls off the horse and boom, 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 with this blasting that's kind of out of tune, and it's just fantastic. But it took me a while to work this one out. But I played this and Schizophrenia, which I blind bought because I really liked Chaos ID. So let's check out some more Sepultura. Holy shit! Talk about listening to a different band. And I used to listen to these on my headphones on my Discman in double maths class up at the back of the class, and just listening to these two in one earphone and doing maths and trying to listen to the teacher or ignore the teacher. But it was always these two albums. And so I was still at that time, drawing Sepultura S's on the blackboard in between classes. But playing these two, it was just this raw, savage, like caveman sounding stuff to my ears at the time. and I just fucking loved it. I loved that I could go from something as polished as like At the Gates, or still listening to things like Metallica's and Justice for All, which was quite technical, and everybody knew Metallica, and then these things just felt like undiscovered gems to me, particularly something like that. I'm like, nobody else I knew at that time. I hadn't started going on those gigs yet, but nobody else was even aware of this band. So Schizophrenia, which is actually my favourite Sepultura now, and Immortal Pure Holocaust. So we're about 1999, I think now. Whenever this came out, was it 98 or 99? 98 it says. So anyway, I got this on release, and I think this was again. No, I don't think it was 3 Hours of Power. I think this one was from Internet Links, people talking about it, and I remember hearing a sample for the Bara Edinezu, the second track, and it kind of reminded me of Suffocation, but had this cool Egyptian thing going on, and I was madly in love with the movie Stargate, so add the two together, and I was amongst the catacombs of Neferenka very quickly. And yeah, I think I just ended up on the ride of the promotional material for this, that this thing is coming, here's a sample, the album's out, go get it. And I got it on release, and this is the first release CD. Got it when it came out, and I play it all the time. It is my most played Nile album still. I think it's their most inventive, not their most technical, but they got the most to say on this album, I think, and I fucking love it. So Nile, Amongst the Catacombs. Okay, Damaged. Token Remedies Research. So I'd seen at this point Pantera, and that was like, oh, this is what concerts are, these giant things. Everybody's there, you got to fight to get tickets and queue up to get them, and then you got to go to the city and all that. And then I turn, no, I wasn't 18 yet because it was an all ages show, so I was still late 17. And Damaged, the Eternal Dismemberment Complex third track, was being punished on Triple J. They kept playing that every 3 Hours of Power. I heard it for 6 months straight, so of course I bought the CD. It sounded like nothing else. It was not quite death metal, it wasn't black metal, but it was fast. It wasn't thrashy, and it was just this thing. It was very different. I hadn't really heard much in the way of grindcore or anything yet, but that's the closest it is. But even then, it's Damaged. It's their own thing. They call it hatecore. Nobody else really sounded like Damaged. Great band. Anyway, I heard they were going to play a show, and it was all ages. And I went out to a place called Annandale, which I'd never been to, somewhere in the city. I went with a mate, got a train, then a bus, and then we walked to this pub. And, I'm underage, but it was an all-ages show, so I go into a pub, which I'd never been, and there was all us 17-year-olds there, and we watched Damaged. They took 20 minutes late to get on stage, and they belted into probably the opening track, or maybe Change. Anyway, they belted into this without a vocalist, nobody on stage, and they just kept going. And we were all like, this is great, fast, loud. I'm not in the giant auditorium. There's only 50 of us here. This is great. But where's the vocalist? Never got one. He never showed. The guitarist, the band looked, in hindsight, they looked fed up and confused. I think the guitarist sort of tried to scream a couple of songs, like to get something out there. But yeah, it was a vocalist set of Damaged. Still loved it. I remember at the time too, we took photos on a disposable camera of our first gig. This kind of first little gig. We paid like $8 entry or something. But those photos are lost to time. I don't know where they went. That was Damaged. Amazing. So I spoke about 3 Hours of Power, and I spoke about Metal for the Brain, and the key bands I saw at Metal for the Brain were Misery and Alchemist. Metal for the Brain was put on by the guys from Alchemist. It was sort of their thing. So they played headline every year. The idea of Metal for the Brain was that it was a charity concert. I can't remember what the kid's name was, but it was a kid that was in an accident and had permanent brain damage and needed sort of money to live. His family needed help, so it was a charitable concert, and I think the family received some portion of the entry tickets. And I think the bands played for free. Anyway, that thing went for like 10 years. It was amazing. One year, I saw Misery and Alchemist, both bands that were played on 3 Hours of Power, and both bands that were just crushing live for two different reasons. Misery was just the heaviest thing I'd seen live at that point. Completely overwhelming sound. The opening to Godspeak is just flat out the loudest thing ever. The track Dark Inspirations was what they played on Triple J all the time. That has got a mad bit in the middle where it sort of keeps recycling, getting slower and slower. It's really, really cool. Listen to that. Listen to that track if you haven't. Dark Inspirations. Misery. And the other thing about this CD is that when it gets to the end, it plays the entire album backwards. Amazing. So this felt very evil, and then I saw it on stage and was wow. And then Alchemist, who was sort of the proggiest thing I'd ever heard at this point. They were sort of death metal-ish, but they were, well, the album's called Spiritech. It was nearly spiritual. Like, it would stop and they'd add extra instruments and keys, and it would go on a bit of a journey, and it was very different. When I saw them, I was quite familiar with Spiritech, but they were touring the EP Eve of the War. Now, prior to any of this stuff, when I was growing up, like 8, 9, 10, my dad had 2 albums. He had Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, which I loved, and the War of the Worlds soundtrack, which I loved. And the opening on that is Eve of the War, which Alchemist covered amazingly, and they played that live. And I'd never seen metalheads dance. That wasn't a mosh. When they played Eve of the War, people were dancing. It was very, very interesting experience. I ended up seeing Alchemist a good half dozen times before they called it a day. And Misery a few times as well. So awesome bands that showed me Australian music was, really just as good as international bands. Particularly when I got to Nazxul. Wow. The Black Seed EP, 4 tracks of... This took the Emperor Anthem sound in my brain and localized it, gave us our own Emperor. But that opening track... So 2, 3, and 4, you could arguably say, oh yeah, that's symphonic-y, sort of blasty black metal, a bit like what Emperor's doing, in a roundabout way. But Vow of Vengeance, I'd never heard anything like that. That is one of the best Australian songs ever, and the best Australian black metal song by far. A long track of slower, mid-paced progression. I had a moment with that song, this entire EP, but that song particularly. When school is finished, so you've done your HSC exams, you've done muck-up day, and it's finished, and you're not going to uni yet, you're not going to TAFE, you're finished school, you're on that 3 months of nothing. The first thing you do is go on schoolies. Schoolies is a holiday, sort of unofficial. It's a bit more official now, but it was just what you did. You grabbed your mates and you all went to the Gold Coast and you laid on a beach and you hooked up with chicks, and that's what you did. And you did it for a week. Everyone did it. And I went with my mates. None of them liked this music. So I packed some stuff. I remember packing Eve of War and Black Seed and a bunch of other stuff. I think the Emperor made it. And one night, everyone wanted to go to a nightclub because we're just 18. And I was already at that point of like, no, I don't like dance music. Why would I go to a place that plays loud dance music? I don't understand what you're doing. Why are you doing this? No, I'm going to stay home. So on schoolies week, everyone's going out to get drunk and go have fun, and I said, no, I'm going to stay home. So here I am in Queensland in a rented place by myself. Of course, I didn't want to associate with going to a nightclub. And it ended up storming, and I had a moment of sitting on a back porch, because we're in Queensland, so lots of open areas, and it started storming, and I had this on my headphones, and I listened to Vow of Vengeance. And there was lightning outside, and the sky was just flashing with lightning, and it was pissing down around me, and all I could hear was Vow of Vengeance. And it was a serious moment. That's just stuck with me. Just of like, that is perfection for black metal right there. That song and that ambient. It was just, amazing. Anyway, so there's all kinds of bands that then happen at that point, and I'm, listening to everything extreme, more and more extreme, and finding things through IRC channels and internet, and listening to 3 Hours of Power, and going to Utopia and just picking up stuff with cool covers, and I was just getting more and more into it by myself, well on my journey. And I found this one on the used bin, In Decay We Trust, Volume 1. This is a avant-garde music compilation. I picked it up, of course. Yeah, cool, compilation. I haven't mentioned this yet, actually, but these fucking Modern Invasion triangle stickers. Any Australian watching this right now knows the bane of these stickers, and that you do not attempt to remove them. You could stick bricks together with this stuff. I don't know what the guy was doing, but anyway. Modern Invasion. They put out everything good that was imported, came through Modern Invasion in Australia. And sometimes they sub-license to like Emperor and Darkthrone. There's their own specific versions. But anyway, I digress. I picked up this compilation because it was like $10 or something. And it was an easy way to find new bands. And what a cracker it is. Katatonia, Keep of Callison, Raven Throne, who I liked then, Godkiller, Taake, October Tide, I don't remember them, Ancient Wisdom. This was some really good stuff, like Soulfowl, Carpathian Forest. But what was really interesting about this, which I didn't realise, so I got this first. So I got this and just played it over and over and over and memorised everything. Loved that it was this compilation of underground bands. And the first one I bought was the Raven Throne. I bought that album. And I put it on and I remember, hang on, this doesn't sound like what was on this CD. So the song on here, Raven Throne, it's actually not very good, but I seem to like it at the time. Kind of a bit like Kampfar and Windir, that kind of sort of pagan-y black metal. And it's got rough, growled vocals. And then I bought the album version, and he's doing clean singing. Not chopping and changing, it's just he went from growled vocals on the demo to clean singing on the album, and I didn't get it. I don't know what happened. I didn't like it as much. Then there came Godkiller, The End of the World. On here, it's a fast, bashing black metal song. Like, yeah, that's great, that's rough and raw, that was a bit like Darkthrone, yeah, I'm digging this, I'll buy the album. Which was like industrial black metal or something. At the time I was just saying it was electronic music. He went clean vocals, the drums are clearly now drum machine. The underlying theme of the song was there, but it was a completely different song. And what the fuck is going on? It turns out, yeah, everything on here is sort of demo versions of what would come later, and some bands really changed. But bands like Taake with Nazxul there, that was just like the album, and they were not quite formative, so I didn't include it. That first Taake album, which I bought from a concert from the merch desk, was pretty up there as well. But then came Dawn, Slaughter Sun. Yeah, don't have too many words for this album. Hugely important album. I got it, I think I was just starting TAFE, so when you finish high school, if you want to keep doing education, you can go to university, which you could call college. And then there's TAFE, which is a bit more of the... If university is more like I want to learn how to be a career kind of job. I want to learn how to be a scientist or an artist or something. TAFE is more, I want to learn how to get paid and do work. That's a good way of putting it. I wanted to do TAFE to do some computer web design stuff because there was a course on how to make websites, and I thought, that's me. Turns out it is me, and that's basically what I do. Anyway, in that 6 months I was at TAFE, there's another story there, but anyway, I was only there 6 months, and one of the weekends before, I went and bought, I went to this record store I'd never been to called the Hammer House, which is out in Parramatta, which from where I lived is a good hour and a half by train, and I went out there by myself, and it was in the middle of nowhere, and that was Australia's Helvet, from what I remember. It was like a small little stall. It's very dark. Everything was like this, or more obscure. And there was a dog there. The dog was called Fenris, and he was trained to bark at people that wore hooded jumpers. Amazing. I didn't appreciate that store enough. I only went there a few times. I kind of wish I was older to have gone there and appreciated that store. But anyway, I bought Slaughter Son because I heard online Falkula, or at least a bit of it. And I loved that it was melodic, but also 10 minutes of just pummeling blasts. It didn't stop. It doesn't stop. It is just a 10 minutes blasting fest. But it was highly emotive. And I used to play this on my train rides to TAFE over and over and over. That was also when I got a girlfriend, and it ended pretty badly, and it became my breakup album. I remember walking around the streets listening to it post-breakup, and it was sort of a combination of just furious anger, but it was also really quite a beautiful album. I mean, you listen to that opening riff on the Knell in the World, fuck me. And that opening, the ending on Malediction Murder, Jesus Christ. This is a perfect album. This would be number 3 after Carcass and Verwüstung Abigor. You'd have Dawn Slaughter Son, because it's just completely perfect. There is nothing I wouldn't change on this. And it has permanently been tied in my brain to a fairly dark time. But sort of like the cover here, like the sun, you could say, is it rising or is it setting? It's kind of both. It was something I needed, and it really helped. It actually really helped. Dawn Slaughter Son. And now we're at TAFE, and I'm just going to TAFE every day. And I think I stepped into a record store. Might have been, actually I think it was Utopia, on the way home from TAFE one day. And I had heard one track each from Marduk and Bethlehem online. The Marduk track I heard was Dracol Wader, and the Bethlehem track I heard was the odd one out here, Nexus, which was easily the weirdest thing I'd heard at that time. And I liked both, and I bought both albums. So the Dracol Wader ended up being the slowest song on Nightwing, and not representative of the rest of the furious brutality of the rest of it. And Nexus doesn't even touch the sides of the rest of Suicide, this album here. I'm not going to try and say the rest of it, but it's commonly known as Suicide. But I grew to love both of them, not expecting, I love them because they were not what I expected. That's what I'm trying to say. This one was fantastic for the speed and the constant, furious, very similar sounding songs, very straightforward and fast. And this one was just all over the shop. I didn't know if it was black metal. Turns out they call it dark metal because it's not quite black metal. Sometimes it's right on the money and it's just screeching black metal, and then sometimes it just draws back and it's doomy. It's just sadness, and then it gets weird with some electronic bits. It's weird. Bethlehem was it. So both those two were sort of my TAFE albums. And then I guess this is the last one to stop on. I'm in my first job, and I'm still obsessed with Carcass. And I'd played everything that they'd ever had, and I learnt that there were Carcass clones, bands that sounded like Carcass, and I found Golem, who were great, Pathologists, who were great, bands like Flesh Grinder, who were the more ripped up versions, just gory. But then I heard of Impaled. I think this was through a magazine, an indie metal magazine, talked about Impaled. I bought the first album, and I really like it, but the for me at the time the production was really lacking. I think it's great now, but anyway. Then they released Mondo Medical, and this would be number 4 in my list of top 10 albums. This is what I wanted Carcass to keep doing once they stopped doing what they were doing. So it's somewhere between necroticism and Heartwork, but then extra blastiness of Symphonies of Sickness, but with a modern sound. And it went with those intro bits of like doctors doing what they shouldn't do, just like necroticism does. And that fucking cover art, it's just epic. Released on Death Vomit, Necropolis. Long out of print. I don't think there's another issue. I've since picked up the record, the LP, because I love this thing so much. Yeah, that was my foray into sort of Carcass clones, and this became my going to work album. So I'm in my first job, and I used to play this on the train going to work quite a lot. And then, well, from that point on, everything just kept getting more and more and more, and you know that's the CDs. It's sort of side there, front, another side, and then repeat. So there, and then behind there. There's about 1,100 CDs, and now obviously all the records, and there's cassettes and things. And I don't own anything crap anymore. I have culled and culled and culled. Everything in here is, as far as I'm concerned, gold. There is no trash. The trash is gone. And yeah, so that's probably the longest video I've done in some time, nearly an hour of me babbling. And I hope you enjoyed it. That's a bit of a personal look at what got me into metal and my journey. So yeah, shoot any questions, or I would love to see response videos. Some notable omissions you might be asking. Where's Iron Maiden? Where's Slayer? Iron Maiden, I don't have any interest in. Sorry, no interest. I've tried. I think there are bands that if you miss them at the right time, you're not going to get into them. I was already on the Chaos AD. There was no point going to Iron Maiden. That would have sounded fruity and twiddly to me. Slayer was a weird one. Not sure what happened there. It took me well into the black metal before I even tried to listen to Slayer. Nobody I knew listened to them, and I guess everybody online probably assumed you already knew them. I don't know. So I missed out on Slayer. There's plenty of bands like that that I came around to after. Thrash is largely ignored here. Thrash happened for me later. Megadeth, far later. Testament, far later. My first Testament album was Demonic, back when that came out, because it sounded like death metal. So yeah, I didn't go through the thrash phase if you exclude And Justice for All. And yeah, I mean, this is sort of where I'm at now. I probably should have included the Bremelin self-titled, actually. That album was pretty high in my rotation for the entirety of 1996. That was definitely, I really should have included that, because that was my first Australian metal band. It was a Bremelin. Yeah, better leave it there. So, losing my voice and losing my will to stay awake. So I will say good night and thanks for watching.